Hello, my name is Hajer Nakua and I'm a neuroscientist and PhD student at the University of Toronto. A neuroscientist is a scientist that researches and studies the brain. Some neuroscientists study the human brain and other neuroscientists study the brains of other animals, such as rats, mice, or monkeys. The brain is probably the most complicated organ there is, and there are thousands and thousands of scientists and neuroscientists really trying to understand how the brain works. My research focuses on studying and trying to understand the human brain. The human brain is made up of many different types of cells. There are neurons, and these are the cells that communicate with each other to send signals to the rest of the brain and the body. And then there are glial cells. Glial cells are helper cells, and they help the neuron survive and do other things that it needs to do in the brain. Examples of glial cells are like astrocytes or microglia. There are billions of cells in the human brain, and our job as neuroscientists is to understand how they all work together to make the brain do everything that it does. There are different ways that neuroscientists can understand the brain. They can study the brains of animals like rats or monkeys using different types of experiments. They can study the roles of specific brain cells by actually studying them in a petri dish outside the brain to see what they do. Or they can use new forms of technology like brain imaging technology that gives us a snapshot into some components of the human brain. That's a type of research that I do. My research takes brain images from humans and then extracts information from them. And that way I can understand things like the size of certain brain regions or the activity style of certain brain regions. And you may be wondering, how are we able to do that? To get information or brain images from humans, we use a really cool tool called magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI for short. To get an image from someone's brain, they would lie down inside an MRI machine, and then a lot of really cool physics stuff happens, and then the machine provides us with an image of their brain. There are different types of MRI images, and each one provides us with a different way that we can see the brain and extract different and unique types of information depending on the MRI image. Once we get these brain images from many participants, we can start analyzing them to tell us features about the brain. So how do we analyze this brain image that comes out of an MRI scanner? Do we just look at them and see if they're different? There are some people who do this. So neurologists, radiologists, and neurosurgeons are highly trained in actually assessing the image and seeing whether someone has a lesion in their brain or something that requires careful attention from a physician. However, in my research, we actually use a lot of different types of mathematical and statistical concepts to extract important pieces of information from the brain image. And we'll break this down. When you look at a photo on your phone or your computer, you're looking at a collection of pixels that all make up the photo. Each pixel provides a tiny piece of information similar to a puzzle piece to make up the whole picture. A brain image works in a very similar way, but instead of a two-dimensional pixel, we work with three-dimensional voxels, and each voxel in the brain provides us with a unique piece of information, a number, and that makes up the image of the brain. We can actually group certain voxels in the brain together, and that may make up a specific brain region we know exists biologically. And then from there, we can use other types of mathematical models or statistical models to understand and analyze these brain regions using the voxels we get from the brain image. So let's walk through a really simple example. Let's just say we have two groups of people, Group A and Group B. And we want to know whether brain region X is larger in people in Group A or among people in Group B. What we can do using brain imaging technology and MRI is that we can have participants that belong to Group A and Group B stand inside an MRI machine. And then we'll get brain images from each participant from both the groups. What we can then do once we have the brain image is we can take the voxels that make up a specific brain region of interest, in this case, brain region X, and we can actually group the voxels in everyone in Group A and group the voxels in everyone in Group B, and then we can then use different types of models to compare the number of voxels within this particular brain region in participants in group A versus participants in group B. That seems a little complicated, but it's not as complicated as you may think. Each voxel provides us with a piece of information. And so when we group voxels in a region, in a specific region that we know is biologically plausible, for example, the amygdala, we're able to do that for one person, and we're able to do that for a group of people. Once we do that for a group of people, we can just separate the groups and then compare the number of voxels within people in group A within one region, and then the number of voxels within a region and people in group B. We compare them, and then we can say people in group A or people in group B have a larger amygdala, for example, or any brain region compared to the other group. This is just one example of how we can use brain imaging technology and the data that we can extract from each voxel in the brain to understand the brain of many different people. And there are many more complicated ways that we could do this, and that's something that I've been trying to explore as I move forward in my PhD journey. So now I'll walk you through some of the type of research that I do specifically. My specific research question is trying to understand the relationship between brain connectivity. This is how different regions in the brain are connected to one another, and mental health symptoms, such as anxiety in children. I'm trying to understand whether mental health symptoms are linked to more brain connectivity or less brain connectivity in children. And we're able to do this using the technology such as MRI because we are able to scan hundreds and thousands of participants and children, in the case for my research, and we're able to do huge types of analyses with so many different types of brain images. This gives us way more accuracy in understanding the relationship between different types of mental health symptoms and brain connectivity. For my research, I focus on children, but many people's research focus on young adults, or even the elderly population. My research is loosely part of this growing field called big data. And that's when we have so much data that we can work with and use to analyze different types of relationships. So in my personal research, I'm analyzing the relationship between brain connectivity and mental health symptoms in children, but big data exists in nearly every field. And it's really exciting because when we have data from so many different people, we're actually able to get quite accurate or more accurate information about the relationship that exists between two variables that we're interested in. For my research, I actually do not do the data collection process that many other neuroscientists do. As I mentioned, I'm part of this sort of loose group of the big data neuroscientists, and what that comes with is that I don't need to collect the data that I use. I actually partner or work with different consortiums, and they collect a lot of the data and then provide me access to that data. And that's how I can analyze hundreds and thousands of people without actually collecting the data myself. And it's been really helpful in getting the research field to sort of quickly be able to analyze a lot of different types of data, ask really unique questions, and I'm really excited to be part of this field and spend a lot of my time asking questions like, how do we best model the relationship between mental health symptoms and brain connectivity? As a neuroscientist, my time is split between analyzing data from brain images, writing about my results to actually publish in a form of a research article to a journal. And this allows me to communicate my findings to the rest of the research community, and then finally presenting my work to other scientists. I find all these tasks really, really exciting. I love being able to sort of be in my head and analyze the data, and then I love being able to communicate that with other scientists and getting feedback to make sure that science is always growing and evolving. In addition to my research work, I also enjoy communicating science research to the public. So I have an Instagram account, it's Hajer Nakua, and this is where I share neuroscience research and different topics in neuroscience and mental health, aimed at just sort of getting this conversation about the brain and neuroscience to the public and having really open dialogue about it, as opposed to it only being conserved in the neuroscience community. I also Try to spend as much time as possible giving back to the science community by joining committees that provide mentorship and other resource support to young scientists and trainees. Each day for every scientist probably looks a little bit different. I am atypical in a way because I like to sleep really early and wake up really early. So I normally start my day around 6 to 6:30 a.m. and I like to start by reading a book for 30 to 60 minutes. I usually end up reading a book about science and the brain, although I'm really trying to venture out and I've been reading more books about other topics like economics or something like that, just to make sure that I'm not only thinking about science all the time. So I do this for some time, have a little bit of downtime in the morning, and then I normally start my workday around 8:30 to 8:45, I would say. And what I like to do is I like to focus on the hardest big task first thing. That's when I personally have the most amount of energy to solve the greatest problem. And sometimes this hard task is debugging code that wasn't working. Sometimes it's getting my algorithm to run properly. Sometimes it's analyzing data. And sometimes it's actually writing the results when I find that it's a little bit challenging to get all my thoughts and ideas out there. Whatever the hardest task is for the day, I always try to make sure I do it first thing in the morning. And I normally do that for about 3 to 4 hours, I would say. I do try to allow myself to take the time that I need to finish the task to make sure that it was done with high quality. After that, I try to spend a little bit of time getting back to emails, writing the emails I need to write, and then responding to the ones that I need to respond to, of course. And after that, I try to use this time to break up the day. So I normally like to do some sort of physical activity, like an at-home workout. Now in the pandemic, it has to be at home, or going for a run. And I do this just to break up my day and re-energize my brain and all my ideas. So that's a really helpful way to get over the 3 p.m. slump. And after that, I spend a couple of hours doing sort of the next major tasks that I have to do. They're normally not as challenging, but they're also not sort of easy, tedious tasks. Sometimes it is finishing up a paper or analyzing the data. The sort of difference between a really hard task and then a not so hard task is really what is involved in the complexity of the problem solving required to get that task. Sometimes there's some things I need to write that seem easy. Other times there are things I need to write that really require a lot of time to get all the wording right. So that's how I separate them. I try to end my workday around 4:35. In the pandemic, it's been a little bit more difficult to balance sort of work from home life. But before the pandemic, I actually normally used to leave my lab around 4 or 4:30, and then I would spend the afternoon doing other types of activities, meeting friends, and just having a break from science because that's always really important. Or I would work on other side projects like my science communication. I completed my undergraduate degree at McMaster University and I studied psychology, neuroscience, and behavior, and I did a bachelor's of science. I took many different classes that were really helpful in my current science journey and helping me understand the foundational principles of the brain or of science. So I took research methods courses, statistics, neuroanatomy, neurobiology, and cognitive neuroscience courses. From there, I started my master's at the University of Toronto's Institute of Medical Science. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then in May of 2020, I did a transfer exam, which actually allowed me to transfer from being a master's student to a PhD student. And that's where I am right now. I would say that the first thing would be I really love talking about the new discoveries that are happening in science with my colleagues and other scientists in the field. I love being able to think really deeply with a group of people and everybody shares their ideas about how we think a certain brain function works. And I really like sort of being intellectually stimulated through conversations. with my colleagues and other members of the scientific community. And I feel like it just reminds me that we're never going to be able to solve a lot of the problems that we're actually trying to solve, but each time we get a little bit closer. And the more we work together and the more we have such conversations with people in the field and outside the field, the more we're going to be able to get closer to solving really complicated problems like how the brain works. I would say that the most important piece of advice that was given to me when I was an adolescent and trying to figure out the best way to pursue a career in science is to find mentors. And these mentors are really going to be critical in helping you navigate the science and academic landscape, which can be challenging at times because it's hard to know the best way to actually, the best moves to make at certain points in your career, even before being a scientist. And of course, there are so many different paths and journeys to science, and we do not need to follow one person's path or one person's journey. We can make our own path and journey, but mentors can really help guide the situation so that you can be a scientist on your terms, but you're also able to get a lot of insight and advice into how to best do that in a way that can help you achieve the success that you personally want to achieve. I have found that the best way to find mentors is to ask people to be your mentor. If you find a scientist that you think is really cool, someone in your community, try to go to them and ask them if they would like to be your mentor. The odds are they will be so excited and honored that you asked. And this is also a really important way to build networking skills, which is always going to be very, very helpful in a career in science. I would also say that I would advise not to limit yourself to one mentor. I have had many, many different mentors throughout my life, and these mentors, some came from my community, some came from outside my community. Some were men, some were women. They were of different backgrounds and ethnicities. I found that this helped me have a really unique and enriched perspective about the different ways to be a scientist, and it helped me figure out how to become the scientist that I wanted to become.